Hello, good afternoon. It is Saturday, certainly. I think, yes, the 9th of September, the 9th of the 9th. It's early afternoon, it's about 2:30 in the afternoon. And I'd like to say welcome. My name is Jared, or Peter, sorry, I'll just adjust that slightly, or Boniface. I am a crocheter and knitter and weaver and sewer and wannabe spinner. Sorry, Bunty's just taking my attention at the moment. I live in Abingdon-on-Thames, which is a town 7 miles due south of the city of Oxford in England. I have 2 cats, Toby and Bunty, who sometimes appear in these videos when they want to know what on earth it is that I'm doing, sitting here looking straight ahead at some telephone screen. And I have a flatmate who may pop in. He's out at the moment doing some shopping, but he'll probably arrive back soon. And I work for a bus company in the city of Oxford. I have worked there since 2000. And I've started there as a bus driver, but currently look after insurance and surveillance systems and the like for the company. And before that, I was a monk for 11 years in a monastery, Benedictine monastery in North Yorkshire, 20 miles north of the city of York, on the southern edge of the North Yorkshire moors. I want to welcome any new viewers. You're very welcome, and thank you for coming to spend some time with me. And I'd like to welcome my new subscribers. It's been quite a sudden spike in interest in my podcast, for which I'm very grateful. My number of subscribers has more or less quintupled from, I think, 14 last week to 73 this week, so it's a significant increase, and a lot of that I owe to Crochet Luna, Claudia, who did a spot on male crocheters and their podcasts in her most recent episode of Crochet Luna's podcast, and I was it was a very generous and extremely positive review of my podcast, for which I'm very grateful. So I hope that I can keep your interest, and that you continue to enjoy watching what I do and enjoy seeing what I'm up to in the world of mostly crochet, a little knitting, and a little of the other fibre related arts and crafts. So first of all, Claudia very rightly pointed out that I have a tendency to blame Wendy for everything related with enabling me in terms of my procurement processes. It actually reminded me of something that my novice master said. When you first join a monastery, in order to learn the particular way of life and the particular do's and don'ts, but also in order to have some guidance about dealing with the pressures of having left home and family and friends, being in an enclosed religious community, making the transition in order to be able to share much more of yourself with a larger group of people. The novice master has a responsibility to guide and teach and correct and support the novices. And you're a novice for 2 years in my community, although you take vows after 1 year, at which point you technically, in canonical terms, become a junior. But because it's such an intense transition of life, my community had a 2-year program. But I remember the very, very, very first conference that the novice master gave. There were 5 novices, so I was one of 5 who joined together, and there were 3 other novices who had joined the year before, and we all sat together around a long table, rather like a dining room table, in the novices' conference room, and the novice master sat at the top end. And he was basically just talking about the duties and responsibilities that each of us had been assigned for the coming 3 months, and how we were to go about those duties. And I remember him saying, I don't want you coming to me saying that I don't want you coming to me saying that the cruet or the bowl broke. They were both made of glass. I want you to come to me and say, I dropped the cruet. And I think that's a very important principle, which Claudia rightly pointed out, that I have a tendency to say, Wendy made me do it. And I have to be honest, Wendy is pushing at an open door when she does take me or ask me if I want to go to Mason's, my local yarn and fabric shops, or any other fabric or yarn shops elsewhere in the area. So Wendy, I owe you an apology. As I say, you are pushing not very hard at an already open door. And I bear the responsibility for my purchases. It's entirely me. My one positive thought on all of this is that I only buy the things in order to make them for other people. So it's actually really quite selfless. I think I'm undoing all the good work I've just done. Anyway, so there we are. That's my mea culpa session dealt with for this podcast. So I think I will move swiftly on then to Toby. What are you doing? Sorry, it's very difficult sometimes podcasting when you have cats who just want to butt in and find out what's going on. Anyway, having made my confession to you all, and my public apology to Wendy after maligning her so terribly over the last 6 months, I have been out and made more purchases. But there is, as ever, there is a specific reason why I've purchased the things I've purchased, so I will talk about those now. The first thing, though, is not something I've just bought, but something that's just arrived, which is my birthday present to myself, which is a Mrs. Brown's bag. Mrs. Brown being Jodie of the Grocery Girls podcast. And I've looked at her bags at the end of each episode with a degree of longing, which perhaps is not natural, but there we go. I love the card that comes with it. It's a very pretty card. Sorry, it's very difficult with a cat right here. But there we are. And I've liked all of her bags. And I love the particular design feature that she uses good quality yarns and has them knitted up in garter or stockinette. But I really liked this cable design, and it's a beautiful little handle, which will be quite, it's quite, hand fits in quite easily, so it's possible to hold that and walk around the flat room to room. It's a lovely plain inside, and I just love this cable. I think the colour and the cabling actually make it look quite masculine. Yes, Toby, it's not for you, it's for me. Which I think I've mentioned before. It can be quite... I don't have... I'm quite in touch with my feminine side. I'm not concerned about it overly, but it's quite nice to have things which are not simply pink and sparkly. Although I like pink and sparkly things as well. It's quite nice having something a little bit more restrained, a little bit more mature, if you like, as well. So I'm really pleased with that, and it's a good size. So I shall be making good use of this. So that's... I'll pop that over there out of the way. So that's my birthday present to myself, not least because having purchased the item, I then had to pay customs on it coming into the country, which was almost half of the original purchase price anyway. I knew that was coming, so it wasn't a surprise, because I've ordered things from stateside in Canada previously and had to pay EU customs import duties. But it does significantly add to the cost of an item if you have to do that. But I'm really pleased with it, and as I say, I knew it was coming. I knew it was going to cost me once it actually arrived, and it's a little present to myself. I'm just going to have a drink. My drink today, it's a Saturday, is Bulmers, which is a cider company from, I think, Herefordshire, which is one of the two main cider parts of the United Kingdom. And this is their blueberry and lime, which sounds terrible, but I can tell you is absolutely delicious, and it's got this gorgeous blush colour to it as well. So excuse me a second. In my new role, I'm on call every other weekend. I'm not on call this weekend, so I can have a drink. And that's my justification, and I'm sticking to it. So I have purchased some other items, yarn. And I'll show this one first, even though it's the purchase I made second. So I went out this morning, actually, and bought these. I had to go and get my hair cut. As you can see, there's not as much as there usually is. I'm a funny... I don't like having my hair cut. I don't know why. I've never had a bad haircut. I mean, my hair... I always wanted to have curly hair. My younger brother has curly hair, and he hated it. And I probably would have hated it had I had it, but not having had curly hair, I hate the fact that my hair is straight all the time. So, you know, it is what it is. It's a very nice young man that cut my hair. We have in the centre of Abingdon 4 barbers, 3 of which are Turkish barbers. And they are indeed all Turkish men. And it's very reasonably priced. Very reasonably priced. It's about half what I normally pay when I go into Oxford. So I knew I had to have my hair cut. It was really getting very long at the back, which it now isn't. So I've had it done, and yes, I think it's looking okay. It always amuses me as I'm sitting there in the barber's chair, and all this white hair begins appearing on the floor around me. I'm 50 next year, so which means I'm 49 in 2 weeks' time, about 10 days' time. But yeah, it's at moments like that that I realise that I'm going to be 50 in 12 months' time. The rest of the time, when I'm not looking in mirrors or myself on the screen, I can pretend that I'm still 17, unless I try to do anything quickly or energetic. But so, anyway, I went to have my hair cut, and I came back via Mason's, which is... Mason's is terrible. This is me making excuses for myself again, but they're terrible because whichever way you go into town, you walk past one of their shops. So of course you've got to go in. I mean, you can't have such an important local resource and not make use of it. So I'm performing a public service by making these purchases. Anyway, so I watched one of the first crochet channels I came across last year when I first started crocheting was Jada in Stitches, and I think she's Canadian. And she's so... I just love... I love listening to her anyway. She has such a happy voice. But she's also an incredibly good and patient teacher. So she takes you through every step, but not... The initial steps are very slow, and then she quickly builds at speed. And she makes lots of amigurumi. That's her speciality. But she made... it just happened to come up on my recommendations list. She made a star, and a star pillow, and she made it from Bernat baby blanket, or Bernet. I've always called it Bernat, but she calls it Bernet. I'm not sure which one it is, but whichever it is, it was their baby blanket, a kind of chenille, super chunky, super bulky is the American version. But in the UK, it would be super chunky. We have chunky and super chunky. So I thought I'd quite like to make that, because as I've mentioned before, I have 2 babies coming at the end of this month. My youngest sister and my eldest niece are both expecting babies. And so I thought I'd quite like to make them one of these stars. So I popped in and I saw this, which is Seriously Chunky by Signet Yarn Limited. And this is their Flamingo colourway, which is striking. So I'm making the first star out of this. I've got a second ball of it. It takes two balls in total. And although it looks stripy in the skein, it's actually, when you make it into single crochets, quite a pretty variegated yarn. Because they're only very short lengths. As you can see, they're very short lengths of the colour. So by the time you've gone in and pulled up loops, you're getting this lovely variegated effect. So that's the centre of the first side of the pillow. So that's one of them that I'm making. And the other one, so I bought 2 of each, is this lovely purple and pink and blue colourway, which is called Nightjar. So I've only just started that, and because it's a super chunky yarn, it will crochet up very quickly. So these I'm hoping to have done. I've got plenty of polyfill to put inside, although she actually used men's t-shirts, large t-shirts that she cut up into small strips to stuff her cushions. I do have ode t-shirts. I suppose I could do that, but I've got lots of polyfill, so I'll probably use the polyfill for these. And I mean, it's 100% acrylic, both of them 100% acrylic, but it's really, really soft and squeaky. It's actually really quite nice. I think because it's quite thick, it's quite a nice yarn to work with in your hands. And the hook I'm using for this is the 10mm. That's the right way around, is it? Yep, the 10mm hook. So it's quite a large hook, as you can imagine, because it's super chunky yarn. And I always put a stitch marker on. So I've got Daryl's crossbow from The Walking Dead stitch marker. Happy, cheerful stitch marker that is. But anyway, so that's a work in progress that I've just started, and I'm hoping I should get both of those done by the end of today. Certainly by tomorrow. I've not got anything else on, so I will just be watching some podcasts to do that. Now, the other thing I'm working on is a new design that I'm working through creating. My pillow behind, the play button pillow cushion, has been very well received. In fact, I'm flattered and humbled by some of the comments that people have made. It has had over 30 downloads already from Ravelry. It's a free pattern on there, so if you go to Ravelry and just put in YouTube play button cushion, it will come up with this pattern for you. And it's a PDF, so you can download it and print it out. It's, I think, 4 pages, but most of it is most of the patterns on 1 page. But as a result of finishing that, I have had another idea in my mind for quite a while that I've wanted to work on, And I'm not going to say too much about it. I will show you a brief glimpse of the very beginning of the pattern, which is this. And it doesn't really tell you a great deal, and I'm not going to say a great deal about it, other than that it's a 4-ply. I'll show you the yarn in a moment, but it's a 4-ply yarn, and I'm using a 5mm crochet hook, which is what's giving it this very open, lacy effect, and also making it super drapey, which is is the effect I was looking for. So the hook size on the yarn label is recommended. I think it's 3.25mm, so it's between 3 and 3.5mm hook size. So I've gone up 1.5mm, as it were. So that's probably 3 hook sizes, I think, higher than the recommended hook size. But it's important always to remember with yarns that the recommended hook size is only recommended for the standard gauge that most patterns that we make utilize. By either increasing the hook size or indeed reducing the hook size, you can get a tighter or looser, well, looser or tighter gauge, which can fundamentally and significantly alter the quality of the fabric. And so you know, whenever you make a determination about what yarn and what hook or needle to use, you should always bear in mind the effect that you're trying to achieve ultimately, and use accordingly. So I'll put that down because I don't want to talk too much more about that. But the 2 colours, it's a 2-colour shawl, and the 2 colours are this lovely yellow and this black. And the black will be used, although it's a bigger, I've got 4 of these 50-gram balls. This is 100 grams. So the yellow is Stylecraft's Cotton 4-ply Classique in their Sunflower colourway. It's a lovely. I took some time yesterday. I was actually looking for wool initially, but then I remembered that I have a friend who's a vegan, and I quite like the idea of making this out of cotton, because not all shawls are for winter wear. Sometimes you want to wear it in the late summer, for example, such as we're in now, or in the early spring, when perhaps you don't want something quite as hot as a woolen shawl might be. And also, as I say, some people don't like using animal products, which I respect. Even if I myself have no difficulty, I completely respect other people's beliefs and opinions on these matters. And cotton is a good, it's a good hypoallergenic kind of material in its own right. Very few people have negative reactions to cotton. It can be sometimes a little bit stiff, particularly if it's mixed with linen. But this cotton is really soft, like all Stylecraft products. And the dark contrast I'm using is this Kinko bamboo cotton. Again, it's 4-ply, 100% cotton. No, sorry, what am I talking about? It's not 100% cotton. It is 48% bamboo and 52% cotton. So it's viscous and cotton, basically. But they're both plant fibres. And the black is going to be used more to delineate and highlight by providing stark contrast to the yellow. So the yellow will be the bulk of the shawl, but the black is a very important and intrinsic part of the design. I'll say nothing more than that. I'm hoping I will get quite a lot of it done over the next week or so, once I finish the cushions that I'm making. It's not going to be as simple and straightforward a construction method as the pillow was behind me, and part of that is because of the effect I want to get with the black against the yellow. So I'm making a virtue out of a vice, if you like. You'll understand a lot more once the pattern is finished, and I'm not being particularly coy. I just want to make sure I can actually do the pattern the way I'm thinking it through at the moment, so I don't want to say anything more on that. So having bought the there we are, Toby. Having bought the black and yellow, because I couldn't find black. I couldn't find black in the. Oh, sorry, don't pick up that one. Pick up that one. I couldn't find the black in Stylecraft Classique, so that was why I looked at the King Cole Bamboo. And having looked at the King Cole Bamboo, I then saw these 4 colours, and I thought, I have to have them. I just have to have them. I know that this is going to make something else. I don't know yet what else it is that I'm going to make with it, but I just think those 4 colours together work incredibly well, and I want to make something out of them. So these are going to be the next design after the one that I'm currently working on, and their colours are this, I believe, is Pebble or Parchment. I think it's Pebble. This is their Turquoise. This is French Navy. And this is Dusty Pink, which is a kind of antique, vintage style pink. And I just think the 4 of them together will just make something really pretty. Again, it's cotton, so it will be quite light and airy, but I think I've got an idea at the back of my mind, which I need to finish the project I'm currently on. So that was it in terms of acquisitions, kind of, because I've mentioned before that I want to start spinning, and I have a drop spindle, and I purchased a drop spindle class on Craftsy. When they were on special offer, they had, I think they called it their $14 special offer, but obviously I paid in pounds and pence, but a reduced price because of that. And what I've needed is a niddy noddy, which is a lovely word. I love saying the word niddy noddy. So rather than buy a wooden one, I decided to make myself one. So this is my homemade niddy noddy. The reason it has copper, well, brass ends is purely because they were half the price of the plastic, and they also didn't have any plastic ones that fit, or rather they did, but they only had 2 plastic ones, and I needed 4, obviously. And the pipe I bought is 21.5 millimeters diameter. It's a waste pipe, and it comes in 2 meter lengths, and because of that, each of the arms of the niddy noddy, which come out and go back in, they're 6 inches. So there's 4 of those at 6 inches, and I had enough to make a vertical length of 1 foot, 1.5 feet, and 2 foot, which means that depending upon the amount of yarn I have to wind or set or whatever I'm doing, I can change the inner part to the length I want. And it took next to no time to make. Well, I say that. It did, except I had to buy a new hacksaw, because I do have a hacksaw, but it's years old and the blade had rusted, and anyway, it's years old, so I needed a new blade at the very least. And I thought the chances of being able to buy a blade for a hacksaw that I bought 30 years ago is probably fairly remote. So I just bought a new hacksaw, and I got it home and I measured out the 6 inches, and I'm cutting away, as you do. I'm thinking, this isn't a very sharp blade, is it? And I'm cutting away and cutting away, and it's barely making, I mean, it is going in, but it's barely going through the plastic. And I'm thinking, there must be something wrong with this blade. Well, there is. As a safety measure, the blade is fitted upside down. So once I'd realised that I was actually cutting with the blunt side of the blade and had turned it round the right way round, once I'd actually got the teeth of the blade cutting through this, it went through like a knife through butter. So, it reminds me of, I used to do a degree of computer support informally when I was in the monastery, because I was quite adept at computing, and many of my brethren were not. And no reason they would have been in the mid 1990s. Computers were only just beginning to really become workplace tools at that point, with Windows 3.1 and the like. And the first question I always asked anybody who said that their computer wasn't working, is it plugged in? Have you turned it on? Because you would be amazed how many times something isn't working is actually because something hasn't been switched on. So I should perhaps have taken my own advice then and just checked that the blade was switched on, as it were. Anyway, we got to the bottom of the problem and sorted it out. Hello, Bunty. You come to join me as well? I'm going to say hello to people. Yeah, there we are. There's a pretty girl. Anyway, so that is all of my acquisitions. In terms of finished objects, I don't think I have I don't have a finished object. I do have a couple of whips that you're already familiar with. I've now finished the first half of the extra long mermaid snuggle sack for my great niece, Charlotte, who, having seen that I'd made the two for the two babies, wanted one of her own for reading in her reading corner. So and she wanted pink, naturally. So this is Starcraft Special DK, 2 strands held together, and it's in their fondant colourway, and it's a wonderful, lovely pink colour. So I've done one half, so I just need to crack on and make the second half. I've got the elastic to go inside, and then it's just a case of sewing them together. So that will probably be an evening's work this week. And my pullover. I have finished the body. Sorry about that if it caught the microphone then. So I finished the body. Sorry, I've got cats trying to play with yarn here. And so that's the whole length of the body finished, with a ribbing, one by one rib at the bottom. And I've now picked up the stitches on one arm, and I'm part way through. Sorry, the yarn is a bit caught over there. It's going all the way. There we are, that's better. So I've picked up the stitches. I was going to do this on DPNs, but my DPNs aren't big enough because I need a 5.5 millimeter DPN, and my DPNs only go up to 5 millimeters. So I had to use the circular, which isn't ideal because the circular is just a little bit too big for the arm, and the arm is too big to do magic loop easily at the moment. So I have to really pull the stitches round and then go like that. So it's a little bit inconvenient at the moment, but as I decrease, once I've got the first 6 inches of the arm done, it should get a lot easier. So I've had to leave the lovely stitch markers in place, which are these lovely owls. I've still got the 2 over here. I only leave those in because there's a garter panel. So it's stockinette all the way, except every other row I have to purl across in order to maintain the garter panel that goes down the top of the sleeve. So there is also, as I was expecting, quite a large gap where I pick up the stitches that were made for the underarm. That's quite normal and will be easily grafted once I've finished from the inside. I've woven in all my ends. I just haven't cut them off, but they are all actually woven in, which is good. And this fisherman's wool yarn from Lion Brand is really grabby, so I'm confident that the ends will stay where they have been woven in, because even as I must mention this actually, I did the tubular cast off, or bind off, on the 1x1 rib, which is effectively Kitchener stitch on a single needle. So you knit off and purl the stitch, then you purl off and knit the stitch from behind. and so it's knit off purl, purl off knit, exactly like Kitchener. And as I was doing that, sometimes the wool was really, it wasn't snagging, it was just because of the fibres. There's quite a nice halo on here. I don't know if you can see the halo. Yes, you can. Because the wool was catching on itself effectively, I was fairly confident when I came to weaving in those ends that they weren't going to work their way loose anytime soon. Yeah, I'm getting quite a long way through. I've done several rows. This is picking up, so about 3 rows. I've not worked on this for the last couple of nights because I've been working on my idea for what I'm knitting, what I'm crocheting. And I've also had other things to do, so I just haven't done as much of that this week. But I've finished the body, and I'm well on the way to finishing the arms. And the arms are obviously a lot fewer stitches than the body, although there's a slightly bigger, more technical concentration required because you do have to decrease at specific points as well. So that's happening. So those are my works in progress done. So I wanted to talk a little bit about terminology, because I find it sometimes very confusing, and I know that people who listen to my podcast sometimes find it very confusing, because we seem to be using the same word for different things or different words for the same thing. So it's interesting. Shakespeare famously, well, the famous quote is, "A rose by any other name would smell as sweet." Although what Shakespeare actually said was, "What's in a name, that which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet," which is not quite the same thing, because, well, Juliet is talking about Romeo because Romeo is a Montague, and that she would love him anyway were he not a Montague, because the Capulets and the Montagues obviously were feuding families in the play. And it got me to thinking about actually Genesis chapter 2, which is the second creation account, where, having created all the world and the plants, God creates Adam, and then realizes that Adam needs companionship, a helpmate. And so he creates all the animals and the birds and brings them to Adam, and Adam names them. And naming things is quite a significant thing in the Old Testament, because naming things gives you power over the thing so named. You make a determination about what that thing is and how you're going to relate to that thing, and how that thing relates to everything else. And new parents have this issue when they are choosing the name of their child, because there are significant pressures to bear in mind, whether you name the child after a family member, and if you name it after your mother's grandmother, do you then have to name the second child after your husband's mother's grandmother? All that kind of thing. And then of course there are the parents who don't consider the impact of the name that they give the child. So my sister was at school with a girl called Teresa Green. I kid you not, Teresa Green. I've worked with someone whose name was Bill Williams, or William Williams, which, if nothing else, shows a remarkable lack of imagination on the part of the parents. Most countries have rules about names that are acceptable for naming children, and these are done as much to protect the child from the worst excesses of the imaginations of their parents as anything else. The naming ceremony is a significant part of Christian initiation, and is a significant part of confirmation, is a significant part of becoming a monk. When I became a monk, I took a new name, which was Boniface. And that name was imposed on me. It was given to me. And there's a little remarked upon but innately understood significance to the name we give things. Anyway, the purpose of this is because I've used the word skein already, or skein, depending upon your pronunciation. Sorry, I'm just... I think it's there. It is. So I wanted to just briefly talk about nomenclature. So, this is a hank. A hank of yarn is basically what comes off a niddy noddy. It is a large circularly wound yarn. It is impossible really to knit or crochet or do anything practical with the yarn when it's in this condition, because it will simply get knotted. Anyone who's had to wind wool from a hank knows that is the case. I just love this, by the way. It just happens to be the one I got out. I think this is their either carnival or festival colourway. It's Navajo. It's an acrylic yarn, but I just love the colours in it. So I'll just let that. I'll refasten that off camera later. It'll stay like that for the time being. So that's a hank. A hank can't be used from that condition in order to do any of our crafts. So we take the hank and we turn it into one of 3 different kinds of usable yarn ball. But there is a 4th usable type of yarn, which is used more for large machines, which is this cone. So it's usually wound on a plastic cone, and this is, I think, 400 grams of, so a pound of yarn. And these would be placed on machines and used more industrially than practically in the domestic setting. So that's a cone. Then there's the cake, which we're all familiar with, which if you have a ball winder, the Knit Picks or Knit Pro ball winder, that will produce a cake, and you can have it center pull, or you can take the yarn from outside. Or in the case of the cushion behind me, I took one strand from the outside and the other strand from the middle and used them both together at the same time. So that's that. Or you can have a ball of yarn, which, as the name suggests, is just a tightly wound ball. And obviously you can have it much bigger than this, and it's ready to use. You just start to pull and the wool unwinds from the ball. I'll just wind it back up so that I can put it away again. And then finally there is the skein or skein. And again, like the cake, the yarn can be taken from the outside, or indeed there'll be a piece in the middle and you pull that and it will be center pull instead. I only raise this because I sometimes get confused when I'm watching particularly Canadian and American channels, because very often the hank of wool, or what I know as a hank, is called a skein. And I think some people also use a skein about 100 grams, and so the mini skeins, I'd call that a mini hank. It's just it's really, I'm just saying, not to get other people to adopt, you know, I'm not right, I'm not wrong. I'm just saying, in this podcast, if I refer to a hank, then this is what I mean. And if I refer to a skein, then that is what I mean. It's just so that you're aware, because I've had a couple of people ask questions and they've just not been familiar with what I've been calling things. So it's names are important, as I say. They have a cultural significance as much as anything else. But in this instance, I just want to say I don't think it matters that much, as long as we can all agree that we know the thing that we're talking about and what it refers to. The fact that we may call it different things is really no great consequence to anybody. But I just thought I'd mention it just to avoid any confusion going forward. So, on to the final part of this podcast then, which is my recommendations. And partly, this part of the episode effectively has written itself for me. There is one recommendation I would make, as well as the drink that I'm drinking. The other thing I'm eating is this Ritter Sport honey salt almonds. And it's a milk chocolate bar with almonds inside that have been roasted with honey and salt. And it is... I cannot tell you how delicious this is. It's got everything you want. It's the smooth, velvety silkiness of the milk chocolate covering the mouth, the crunch of the almond, the slight kick of the salt, and then the deep spiciness almost of the honey. It's absolutely delicious. Made by Ritter, which is a German chocolate company. Yet another reason why Britain should be in the EU, because their chocolates are delicious, frankly. Excuse me. But if you can get hold of that, I promise you, you will not be disappointed. They make lots of others, peppermint and all the usual kind of flavours, but that honey salt or almonds is absolutely delicious. I can't recommend it enough. So my other recommendations are partly podcasts, mostly podcasts. I would just say I finished watching the Game of Thrones season 7, and I'm slightly disappointed. I mean, it was brilliant, don't get me wrong. I really enjoyed the programme. I'm slightly disappointed only because, as a result of, for anyone who's not a Game of Thrones person, this is not going to mean anything, but for those who are, I hope you've watched the episodes. If you haven't, stop listening now and go and watch the episodes and then come back. Because of the internecine warfare that's been going on for the previous 6 seasons, most of the belligerent males, fictional universe, have been killed, which has left actually quite dominant and powerful women in charge instead. And given that the Game of Thrones is loosely based on medieval Europe and the kind of our modern understanding of politics and warfare in medieval Europe, that's really been quite fascinating, because the role of women, even women of powerful families in medieval Europe, was pretty well circumscribed by their subservient role to men. In a sense, I mean, they're speaking about the Kingdom of England, because I know more about it. There have been a number of powerful queens, Matilda, who fought her cousin Stephen for the crown, and whose son Henry ended up being the king. Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was married to both the French king and the English king, because she was very rich and powerful in her own right, and whose sons were Richard the Lionheart and King John. And Isabel, who effectively killed her husband and set herself and her lover up as regents for her young son. And these are all significant roles for women, because once a princess is married to a king as a part of a political treaty in medieval Europe, the king doesn't necessarily love them, but has to have his union with them and produce an heir, both for the sake of his own crown and for the sake of the treaty or pact that he's entered his kingdom into with the kingdom that the princess is from. And really the only power that the queen then has is nurturing the man who will replace her husband as king, her own son. And this is indeed the source an origin of most of the conflicts that happen between kings and their sons, because the son doesn't want to hang around waiting for the old man to, you know, shuffle off this mortal coil, and sometimes they aided and abetted with ways to speed up the process. And indeed, someone like Absalom and his mother did pretty much the same thing with King Solomon. No, sorry, King David. So that, you know, there's an ancient history. This has been the kind of role that women have had to play, because it was the only role available to them. And one of the things that Game of Thrones had done up until the end of this season was present very powerful women. So Cersei in on the Iron Throne, then you've got Daenerys, and then you've got Sansa, and I can't remember her name, but the other woman in the north, and then Highgarden. So you had these very strong, powerful women who were the last man standing, as it were. And then suddenly we have this reveal that Jon Snow is actually not the bastard son of the Lord of the North. He's actually the legitimate son and rightful heir of the Iron Throne. And it's kind of, really, did we have to do that? Did we have to go there? Because actually the woman against woman confrontation that would inevitably have happened between the three powerful women, Daenerys, Sansa and Cersei, would have been, I think, a far more interesting dynamic to play out in power politics. And it's somehow, I'm kind of, it was a bit disappointing that Jon Snow, even though he's now sleeping with, I think Daenerys would therefore be his aunt, but given that Jaime and Cersei have had 2 children and a third on the way, and their brother and sister, that's actually quite good behaviour in the in the medieval mindset of the Game of Thrones. I'm just a little, I knew it was coming because it had been trailed with the prophecies for so long, but it was still a bit disappointing when it happened, and it kind of makes it all a bit obvious, really. I may be wrong, and I'd love to stand corrected in a year's time or so, whenever the final series is actually completed and shown. But yeah, it was a bit disappointing in the end. The other television program that I've discovered on Netflix is the Gilmore Girls. Now, I'm sure all of you watching are thinking, how on earth has this man never heard of the Gilmore Girls? The original series came out in 2000. I was still in the monastery in 2000 and only left at the end of July 2000. And really until 2002 wasn't really involved in popular culture and that kind of thing, and certainly not American TV shows. That's kind of crept up on me over the last 10-15 years, the high quality of American TV shows as well. And I'm really enjoying it. I'm halfway through the second series, and it's really enjoyable viewing. It's interesting. It's the kind of situational rom-com drama kind of thing that I quite enjoy. So if you haven't watched it, or if you have watched it and have forgotten about it, it's on Netflix UK, certainly. I would imagine it's on Netflix US as well. It's well worth plugging into. I know that they made a kind of Gilmore Girls brought up to date last year or the year before. I've not watched that because I hadn't watched the original series. Now I'm watching the original series. I'll watch that once I've finished. But yeah, I'm really quite enjoying that. So I thought I'd pass that on. And I want to talk about a few podcasts. Obviously Claudia at Crochet Luna, to whom I owe great thanks for her generosity and warmth and kindness to me. And through her, I have started watching Quo, I think, the Quo podcast, which is Quailin. And he seems to be really quite up my street in terms of the few episodes that I've seen of his so far. I'm really enjoying watching those. I also simultaneously started watching No Catchy Name, which is Ella. I can't remember. Does she live in Georgia? Why have I got the word Georgia in my head? Anyway, she's lovely. She has a delightful little toddler, Jess, I think she calls him, and she's always apologising for him. But it's just he is loud and noisy and silly and does all the things a toddler does do. And I'm sure he's running her ragged, and she's loving every minute of it. I suspect. Anyway, I don't know how she gets time to do any crafting work, but she gets an awful lot of stuff done. So I enjoy watching her as much because it reminds me of being younger. When we come home from school, we didn't really use the sitting room very much during the day. We tended only to use the sitting room at night time, after dinner. Well, after tea. I come from the north of England, where dinner is what you eat at lunchtime, so around midday, and tea is what you eat at dinner time, around 6, 7 o'clock. Whereas in the south, they call it lunch and dinner. I would call it dinner and tea. Anyway. Again, it's the interesting thing that a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Although, of course, I should say there, on that particular... Sorry, I do this fly off at tangents all the time. On this particular thing, I have a friend who, in the 1990s, did, as part of her doctorate in English, she did a thesis, or some work anyway, on the earlier printed versions of Shakespeare's works. And the earliest versions are ones that Shakespeare could have been involved in. Whether he was, we don't know for certain, where it is a rose, but the better versions that were printed, the ones where the corrections that had been in the earlier printed edition, and we're talking about only a few years between the two, in the earliest printed editions of Shakespeare, there are crossings out that have clearly not been recognised as being crossings out because the introduction to speeches are printed twice, but with slight variations. So you'll get the beginning of to be or not to be, and it'll be to be or not to be or to be kind of thing. And then it suddenly starts again with the correct version. So clearly the wrong version had been crossed out and the right version written in, and then both of them had accidentally been printed. Well, the later version doesn't have those mistakes and is considered by scholars to be a more accurate and more professional version of printing. But that doesn't say a rose by any other name, it says a rose by any other word. So the interesting thing there is it name or is it word, and what's the difference, and does it change the meaning, and so on and so forth. And she wrote a whole thesis on this, and I'm not going to pretend that I could argue convincingly, linguistically or otherwise, but it's just interesting, completely nonsense aside. Anyway, so when I was a child, we used to we'd come home from school, and often we'd come home from school with neighbours' kids, and we'd have a jam butty, a jam sandwich, so bread and jam, and a drink. And very often my mum would be with other mums, and they'd either be sitting at the kitchen table talking, having a cup of tea, or they'd stand at the yard gates, or talking across the bin cupboards, or they'd be in the front garden at weekends and talking across the fence to each other. And there'd be kids running around and being noisy, and the children would be all the ages from newborn all the way through to 10, 12, 15 years of age. And in all of that, I always remember my mum would be there with her knitting. She always had her knitting with her. Wherever she went, she would be knitting, because there'd always be something else that needs to be made. So sitting, watching Ella in No Catchy Name podcast, which is a crochet podcast, and having her son making lots of noise off camera, it almost transports me into her kitchen or sitting room or wherever she's podcasting from, with my I'm working on my crochet or my knitting whilst watching her, and it's almost transporting me into being my mother in that location, in that kind of environment. So I really enjoy it. I'm sure there'll be people who find it very disturbing and find it difficult to watch because of the noises. I love it. She's always apologising and says she'll cut it out, but then thankfully she doesn't cut it out, and I just love it, the fact it's there. And what's important for me, and I think this is why she shouldn't, and this is one of the reasons why I try not to edit mine too much. I think if you're going to do a podcast, you're inviting people to experience your crafting life in a small, for better or worse, polished way. And part of her crafting life is the presence of a very young child, just as part of my crafting life is having cats that just wander in, and if you've got something on your lap, they push it off your lap so that they can sit on your lap. Or we'll start playing with the yarn as you're trying to make something. Or we'll go and jump up onto the chair next to the camera. It's a good job I saw that about to happen. Toby, you are very much in the way, dear. There you go. But that's part of my life, and having a toddler is part of her life, and that's what you're sharing, and I think that's a very important part of the experience of watching podcasts. And I loved the fact also that she was very kind, and she said how much she wanted to make one of these as well. So I'm pleased that it's something we can share in common. So yes, so there we are. And the other podcast I've been watching is called Crochet Cakes, and this was actually so this is Elizabeth, who is from Puerto Rico. So I'm hoping as well, Elizabeth, that you are not being too badly affected by the horrible situation that the Caribbean and southwest coast of America is currently facing. I hope you're safe, and that your family is safe, and that these storms pass by without creating too much havoc for you. And you're very much in my thoughts and prayers, as are all the islanders and people of Florida at this time, as well as the people of Texas. But I was actually put onto the presence of Crochet Cakes as a podcast by Elizabeth's mother, Caroline, who put a comment on one of my most recent video, I think, and pointed me in that direction of her daughter's podcast, and didn't actually say, but she herself takes part in her daughter's podcast. And I just want to say, Caroline, that your voice, if you've not heard, I mean, I love the presentation anyway, but Elizabeth's mother's voice it's like liquid velvet. It's rich, it's soothing and warm. If you're not doing voiceover work, you should get an agent, because frankly, I would buy anything that was being sold to me in that voice. It is such a beautiful, rich voice to listen to. And you do wonderful work with the crochet, as does Elizabeth. But I can thoroughly recommend the Crochet Cakes podcast anyway, but you get the added bonus of Caroline there as well. So I think I probably talked myself to a standstill. I've hit the hour mark again. I try not to go on for too long, because I think an hour is probably about what people can tolerate. So I'd just like to thank you once again for spending some time with me. And thank you for those who have subscribed. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed and want to keep in touch with new videos as I upload them, then please click the subscribe buttons and turn on notifications, and you'll be notified. I am currently maintaining the weekly podcast, and I quite like the fact that I do. I mean, I get to Wednesday and I think, oh God, what am I going to talk about this week? What have I got to talk about? And in fact, I never have any shortage of things that I can witter about for an hour. but what it does do is give me some sense of discipline, in that it makes me focus on getting things finished. So I think if I were left to my own devices, I'd probably start a billion different projects, because I quite like the idea of using that yarn, or I quite like the idea of trying out that process, or stitch, or whatever it is, but I'd never actually finish anything. So having the weekly podcast timetable probably helps to keep me honest, to keep it real. So as I say, thank you very much for spending some time with me, and I thank you for all the support you've given me over the last week. It's very much appreciated, and I look forward to speaking to you all again soon. So until then, stay safe, stay well, stay happy, and good luck with your projects. Goodbye.